Welcome. Hello, hi everyone. Hi, how are you feeling? Yeah, it's the final day today. Yeah, thank you for staying engaged with us over the last 3 days. Today will be more of a creative day, I think. So the last 2 days we've looked at methodologies, we've looked at practical exercises on GRB tools. Today we'll ask you to get a bit more creative and thinking about how to move from designing policies into implementation stage. So we'll look at things like capacity building, building a network. We'll look at dealing with the opposition, creating an advocacy strategy. So yeah, today we'll ask you to get your creative thinking caps on, and hopefully we'll enjoy the session together today. I guess before we start, we have a short icebreaker. It's guess the politician. So this is just a warm-up exercise. So I'll explain the instructions. So each table will be assigned a politician, and we'll give one person the name of the politician, and your table has to, or the person has to ask questions. Okay, so you have up to 21 questions to guess who the politician is, and whoever guesses in the least amount of questions wins. And you win the chance to be here today. Okay? Okay? So, I'll just go around in assigning. So on this table, who do you nominate to be the person that guesses? Who do you think will ask the right questions?
It's going to be stuck on your head. You won't be able to see.
Okay? So we will assign you. Okay, so I'll put it on your forehead. So I'll get you to place it. Okay, so you can't see, but your table can see. Get them to look. Okay. Okay. Maybe we'll get you to join another table for now, just until the table is full. Yeah. So Daniel, please join here, and you can join the table here. Yeah. Okay. So on this table, who do you assign to be the guessee? Who's going to ask the right questions? The question, you will be asking questions. Is this person a man? Are they from, you have to, is there any yes or no answers as well? Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I'll get you to put it on your board. So you can't, hey, did you see this? Are you sure? Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. You can see its table? Okay. It's not a reflection on your character, so don't worry. The name that you have on there. Calvin? Okay. Okay. So we've got this one here. Yeah? Okay, so we'll do group by group, and I'll have a tally, so in how many questions that you've asked. This one? Well, we'll put it on the... Yeah. I'll take it off and put it on the thing, yeah? Okay, we'll start with...
I think just move on to here for the exercise.
Okay, we'll start with this group. So you have to ask questions, and you guys can only say yes or no.
Do we want to give them a mic?
So yeah, a mic here.
Should we start?
Yes.
Is he an African politician?
Yes.
African.
You're right.
Is he from the north? Is he from the east? Southern?
Yes.
Is he a national leader, considered a national. Is he?
I just want to point out, you assumed he's a he. You didn't ask. You know, there's a bias there.
I'm assuming it's a president. Okay, I was assuming it was a president. Is he a president?
No, it's yes or no.
Is he a former president?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
guys.
that can only be one woman from the south, right? Nelson Mandela, Robert Mugabe.
Oh, good. Okay.
Everybody's doing
Okay, well done. You guessed in 10 questions. So let's see if anyone beats the score. Okay, so 10 questions is the score to beat. Let's see. Okay, so we have group 2 over here. Put the mic. Okay, make sure it's just yes or no answers.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is she or he a politician?
Ah, it's yes or no?
Okay. From Africa? Central? Western? Southern? Northern?
Remember, 10 questions is the answer. The score to beat.
East Africa? President? Uganda? Current? Museveni?
Wait, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11.
Well,
So
Close.
group 1 is still in the lead with 10 questions, but well done. Thank you. Okay, so we have the last group here. So, yeah, remember, yes or no answers only.
Good morning. All right. First, I would want to know this politician, if he or she, okay, is the gender of the politician. So is he or she male or female?
No, it's yes,
Yes
or
or
no
no.
answer.
Oh, yes or no? Okay. All right.
You can say,
Is he a man?
Are they?
Okay. Is he current president? Is he from Central Africa? Is he from Africa? Right. From America? Okay. You said current president, right? Okay. The name is Donald Trump.
No, get no clues.
Okay.
Okay, remember, 10 questions is the score to beat.
Okay. So North America, in United States of America or Southern America?
Yes or no question.
Okay. Is he from United States of America or? Obama?
Okay.
But you see the current president, right? Oh, okay. Fine.
Okay, 9 questions. So this table 3 wins. Okay, well done. Okay. Thank you guys. That was just a quick warm-up exercise. Thank you for participating. Well done. Thank you. Hmm? can return to your seats actually, Rena, Daniel, and Monica. Yeah. I think Monica is here. Excellent. It's here, okay.
We need the 6.
Let me bring Monica here, so you can do this for now. Okay, it's fine. You can sit here. Welcome, Asha. We'll have you over here.
Good morning, everybody. This is going to be a nice, easy session for you because I'm going to talk and you're going to get to watch and listen. So I apologise that I have to be behind this podium. It's because I have a lot to say. But I was hearing yesterday, people were saying things like, we've done a lot of training, we've talked a lot about policy, we've done a lot of gender responsive budgeting practice, but we want to move to implementation and we've got good laws, so we want to get to the point where we can actually see the change happening. So we changed the training schedule slightly in order to incorporate network building and strategy building portion of the day. So you're going to be very active and using your brain a lot, so I thought I'd give you 25 minutes of listening before you're leading the rest of the day. You may or may not know about the UK Women's Budget Group. We've been working with CCGD for quite a while now, but I realise that not everybody knows where me and Ebian are coming from. So we work for a small non-profit organisation called the UK Women's Budget Group, which is based in the UK. And we started as a small group of women who were frustrated that decisions about the impact of the budget every year did not include how the budget would affect men and women differently. So from the start, one of the strengths of the Women's Budget Group was that it involved members from a very different range of backgrounds with different expertise, so particularly academia, and it involved the women's voluntary sector and trade unions. So in the UK, the way that the NGO space works is that for women in the women's sector, you have kind of frontline service providers who are usually focused on things like domestic violence and all of the issues that stem from that. But then you have, we position ourselves as second tier, so we work in the policy, trying to influence policy, but we work very, very closely with those grassroots and frontlines organisations so that very much the experiences of the women inform our policy responses. So as well as bringing a range of expertise to the Women's Budget Group, members use the Women's Budget Group analysis to influence their own networks and build awareness of feminist approaches to economics within academia, within trade unions, and within the women's movement as a whole. So some gender budgeting groups also involve policy makers, but whilst WBG has allies amongst parliamentarians and civil servants, the group has always remained independent of government and political parties. And you'll see throughout our history, there'll be times when we're closer to whichever political party in power and our policies resonate and we have more of a direct channel, or today we find ourselves in a position where we're very much on the outside and we have a very hostile and unfriendly political environment to operate in, and so we have to adapt our strategy. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So the membership of a gender budgeting group can be largely broken up into three sections. So at the top, we have the academics, and they bring the research expertise, they bring credible research, rigorous research that can be backed up by methodologies, and they have to be seen as independent. Then we've got in the corner the civil society organisations, so this includes the trade unions, the women's movements, who bring the frontline expertise, so down from the grassroots all the way up, and they have experience of lobbying and of engaging with the media and focusing on communications and how to talk about gender responsive budgeting. It's very nice to have research that's very rigorous, but if your research sits on a shelf and nobody reads it, it's useless. So you need the civil society organisations to bring your message forward and communicate it in accessible ways that make sense to a regular person. And then on the other side, we have the feminist policymakers. So this is our strategic relationships that we have to forge, and they bring about the understanding. They bring the understanding of how to bring change in the policy world. and they help build contacts and alliances. So either you'll find someone who is a decision maker, who is in power, who agrees with your policies, or you make a connection with somebody who has influence on that person. So it's all about getting your policies, your suggestions, your pressuring the right people and making sure your stuff ends up on the right desk. Next slide, please. So as the group grew, the Women's Budget Group started to identify potential allies amongst civil servants, journalists, politicians, and advisors from different political parties. So these allies help the Women's Budget Group communicate its findings to a wider audience and to influence policy. So an early task for any group who wants to promote gender-responsive budgeting is to map out different stakeholders. We're going to have a practical exercise on that later. And stakeholders include institutions, organisations, other networks, and specific individuals which might have an interest in your work. So this could include those who you want to involve in your group, so to join the network as a member, and also those who you want to influence, to persuade, to change their mind. So it helps to think about where different stakeholders fit on a chart like this, which is included in your workbook, so I can't recall which page. So you've got potential members of the network in the core, then on the outside you've got allies, and then you've got your targets to influence the people that you need to persuade. It's also worth thinking about opposition to your work and where that might come from. So the potential allies and opponents that you think about will vary depending on the context, whichever policy that you're trying to push, whichever area that you're focusing on. But they might include some of the people listed here. So you've got grassroots women's organisations, larger national women's organisations, other equality and social justice voluntary organisations. So you've got people working on similar issues. So we're the Women's Budget Group, we work in the women's sector, but we work very closely with people who work on child poverty because these things are very linked. Trade unions, particularly those representing large numbers of women, so trade unions that represent sectors where women are likely to be found. Research institutes and think tanks to help you to partner on producing robust research. Political parties and individual politicians. Parliamentary committees working on relevant areas. So parliamentary committees in the UK often are cross-party, so they won't be tied to an ideology, or be people from different parties working on a specific issue. Academic networks with an interest in gender or the economy. International NGOs who usually come with funding, and civil servants who usually stay in the institution even when there's a policy change, government change. So there may be potential allies and opponents in each of these groups, and you have to think about that when you're mapping your strategy. So when you're building these alliances, you have to think about what you can offer them. Politicians and civil servants, for example, and other policymakers really value expert evidence because they don't have the time or the capacity to find research or statistics that pertain to their local area or wherever they're representing. So they really appreciate having really reliable evidence that they can use in policy making to persuade their colleagues to act on a specific issue that they're passionate about. So it's all about this idea of exchange. It's easy to make the ethical argument, the moral argument that might capture people for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe one day. But if they don't see steps forward, then it will fall off the table. Academics value an opportunity to use their research to influence policy. Academics typically sometimes work alone. They're embedded in the institution of the university, and they have a hard time trying to translate their research that they love and are very passionate about into real life impact. So your gender budgeting network could give them that avenue. And also forge links with frontline organisations for them that could help them with their future research. Women's organisations, particularly the frontline women's organisations, the service providers, value evidence and analysis that they can use in their campaigning and their advocacy work. Again, they have an issue of resource and capacity. They don't have the time to do the research, to get the statistics in order to build into future funding applications or their campaigning work. So they really value the opportunity to have reliable research that they can use for their own purposes. Next slide, please. So the first step, after you've mapped out your stakeholders, your allies, your opponents, you need to find an initial focus. So civil society groups working on gender responsive budgeting generally start with a focus on a particular stage in the budget cycle, which we've talked about the last couple of days, or they focus on a particular policy issue. So one of the first tasks is to find out about the budget cycle, which we started yesterday, but you'll continue going forward. So mapping out the budget cycle will help you think through where you have the most opportunities for impact, and your activities will depend on the context in which you're working with, based on where you are in the budget cycle, what your political opportunities are, and the time frames that you want to achieve your objectives in. But some of your activities could involve research and analysis, using the findings of your research for specific things, and also capacity building. So to take research analysis first, thank you. You can do research and analysis into the likely or actual impact of the budget or any other economic policy decisions. You could do research on the likely or actual impact of policy in a specific area, for example, spending on health, if there's been a new health policy announced. You can do research on whether actual spending on services matches budget commitments. So, looking at the budget, and then I think we talked about the supplementary budget in the Kenyan context and seeing where the discrepancies are. And you can also do research on a specific issue around the needs of women and men, girls and boys, and the spending required to meet those needs, so the other way. At the Women's Budget Group, our bread and butter is every year we produce a response to the budget, which is announced once a year by the Chancellor in the autumn. In advance of the budget, we produce pre-budget briefings based on a number of different areas that affect women, so all the way from social security, tax and trade, childcare, and so on and so forth. We work with partner organisations in advance, especially people who have links with Parliament, to collect leaks and rumours so that we can develop as many responses as we can in advance. Because with these types of things, timing is everything. If you're getting your response out 2 weeks later, the news cycle doesn't care anymore and nobody's picking up your budget response. So collecting leaks as much as possible is one of our strategies. We were very fortunate in that the last budget that we had, there was so much leaked because the political party in question wanted to test public reactions to each and every announcement. So we basically had our response before the budget came out, but it depends on what scenario you're working in. We use social media on the day, we live tweet, and we get messages to key journalists who we've already built relationships with, as well as to our political contacts. We have a press release on the day, which is a summary of our response, and then somebody works all night that day to produce a summary response that we release the following morning. Within the week, we'll have a more detailed response, which is very robust and links to all of our previous research with statistics. And we divide this work up in partnerships. So across the whole network, it's not just the paid staff of the Women's Budget Group, it's all of our academics and policy experts that we give them different sections, and everyone goes away and then we combine our responses. So it's very much a shared project. Next slide, please. Okay. Moving on to the next point, which was being able to use the findings of your research and analysis. So you can use any of your findings to advocate for changes to policy or practice across the government or within a specific department. You can use your research to highlight the need for national, regional, or local government to carry out their own analysis. So it's very much about highlighting gaps. You'll do research and you might find sex disaggregated data, but you won't be able to find data disaggregated by disability, race or ethnicity or geography. So this is where you would push for more research to be carried out by institutions that have the power and the resource to do it, to collect it. You can use your research to inform the work of women's voluntary organisations, so feeding it downwards. And you can also feed it upwards to inform the work of parliamentarians to hold government to account. So in 1997, the Labour government had a famous landslide victory in the UK. And there were 101 Labour women MPs elected, which was a record, which meant that the Women's Budget Group, remember, had been working since 1989. Suddenly the political environment changed and they had a different avenue to employ, a different advocacy strategy. So a lot of the ministers had a background and links with the women's movement. So they were in the shadow cabinet, and then suddenly they were in decision-making positions of power. And the Minister for Women, who was Harriet Harman that year, introduced gender mainstreaming. So she announced gender mainstreaming as a public commitment, which meant that there was an avenue for the Women's Budget Group to use their previous political contacts to influence change. But the key thing was that the Chancellor made a public commitment to end child poverty, which meant that the Women's Budget Group were able to draw on their previous research that they've been carrying out for years that nobody was listening to argue that children were poor mainly because their mothers were poor. So if you tackle women's poverty, you will tackle child poverty as well. So it's just about seizing your opportunities and biding your time to be able to communicate your message at the right time. Next slide, please. And then finally, one of your other activities could be capacity building. So when you're capacity building, you're providing expert advice and training to either civil servants or elected officials who wish to carry out gender responsive budgeting. So they very much understand the economics, they understand the budget, they understand all of the cycles around it, but they don't understand where gender fits into it and why. So your challenge is then to carry out a training that they can not only understand but take forward with steps. So that was a lot of the work that the Women's Budget Group were doing post 1997. If that's not a possibility, you can always work with backbench politicians to build their capacity to hold local or national government to account. So where someone is in the opposition, they will be looking for opportunities and research and credible evidence to be able to call out the government in power to show them as inaccurate or to take their attention to a specific issue. And also you can do capacity building of women and smaller civil society organisations to engage with the budget process. So when you do capacity building on the grassroots level are experts in the situation of women. They know exactly what's going on. You don't need to explain to them why gender is important, but there's usually a lot of hesitation and lack of confidence around budgetary processes, government cycles, and economics in general, because it's an area that has been typically dominated by men. So there's a lot of demystification work that can go into your capacity building. So one of the projects that we have running at the moment is our local data project in the UK. So it's a project to build and strengthen the capacity of small local organisations who campaign for women's equality to access, and they use equality data data in their advocacy and campaign work. So where someone is working in a small organisation and doesn't have the time or the resource or the capacity to carry out research, the local data project will have small workshops to show them where data is found, where the statistics are collected, and how they can use them in their campaigning strategies. So there's a participatory workshop program for local women's organisation. The workshops are free and open to all. They're very popular. People sign up whenever we advertise them. It's a space for people to network and coordinate their local campaigns. We try to get a geographical spread because the UK is a small country, but there's a lot of discrepancies and differences depending on where you live, on your access to things. And also it's created a resource hub, so it has its own website. So any of the work that is produced and all of the tutorials and the videos are very accessible, and they're all left on the website, so that even if you don't make it to a workshop, you can use any of the resources that we have published. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is just a basic run through of just the Women's Budget Group background. And we've tried to distill some of the general factors that led to success to make them a bit more universal. So some of the lessons that we've learned is that simply analysing the likely impact of the budget or monitoring the impact is very valuable work, but if it's to lead to change, there needs to be a very long-term strategy to influence the behaviour of governments and also influence cultural change. So based on our own experience and extensive discussions with groups who carry out similar work, we've identified a few factors that lead to changes in government policy or law. So the first of these is an understanding of the political context. So it's important to identify the key gender issues in the country where you live. So for example, in the UK, primary school education for girls is not an issue, but having access to lifelong learning and technical apprenticeships to develop yourself in your career is an issue. Similarly, in the UK, access to water and sanitation is widely available, but public transportation isn't. So you pick the issues that are most relevant to your political context and you start there. So in contexts where governments are resistant to carrying out gender responsive budgeting, there are still initiatives that civil society can take. And this might include things like carrying out your own analysis of the budget to highlight gaps, framing the need for gender responsive budgeting in the language of government priorities, and also analysing the gender impact of specific policy proposals, which we've done some practice on already. The second factor is civil society participation. So civil society organisations have always played a very important role within the Women's Budget Group because turning analysis into political change needs a wider movement. Many organisations have brought their frontline experience to WBG research and analysis and then use that analysis to support on their public campaigning. So again, about that exchange and partnership work. In the UK, the resource of funding for civil society organisation gets smaller every year. And so it becomes necessary to partner with other organisations to divide the work because you can't do everything yourself, you just don't have the resource. The third is to find champions and allies in key positions. So building relationships with key allies has helped us gain access to politicians and policymakers, as well as to promote our analysis in the media and civil society. So, perspective. For example, independent research institutes work on fiscal policy, socio-economic inequality and racial inequality, often don't have a gender angle, but you can use their work to further yours. Getting the timing right. So, as we saw in the budget cycle diagram, there are often multiple opportunities to have an impact on the budgeting process. But timing is very critical. Impact assessments carried out way after the budget is published will be too late to influence the budget's passage through Parliament and will be forgotten in time for the next budget. And finally, you have to remember that this is a long-term project. So persuading governments to adopt a gender budgeting approach can take many years, and policies can be reversed with a change of government. So it's important to plan for the long term, to build relationships across parties, and to be ready to take advantage of new opportunities as political contexts change. Political opportunities can change very suddenly. You can produce analysis that doesn't seem to have much of an impact for years because the political will, the opportunity is not there. But when things change, you need to be ready to move quickly. So analysis needs to be done and organisations need to be ready. Yeah, does anyone have any questions? Thank you for listening. I know that was a lot of words. Yeah. Any thoughts? Yeah.
Thank you for that great insight about WBG, and just maybe to give us, like for example, as SSGD we work also to advocate for gender equality, and also now that we are in KGBA we also advocate for responsive gender budgeting, and maybe to you guide us or to give us how you work with the National Treasury on your end, or the budget accumulators, how is it to work with budget, the government budget office in your country, so that also we can learn from our end. Thank you.
I mean, at the moment, we do not work with the Treasury. We don't have those political contacts. We don't have those links because we're just not in that political context at the moment. But when we did, there was a lot of training, capacity building to bring the gender focus to policies that Treasury's decisions that they were making. The lesson that we learned from that is that when there's the insider, outsider, so when you're working closely with government officials, including the Treasury, you're less able to criticise and you're less able to burn those bridges because you have to focus on your long-term political strategy. So often you won't be able to push for everything that you want and you'll have to make a lot of compromises. When you're not working with the Treasury, you're much more able to increase public pressure to try and instill that political will because you don't have anything to lose. that would be the only lesson that I can share.
Maybe to maybe follow up on that also is that what is the strategy to influence the budget
At the moment.
at the moment in your country?
Yeah, at the moment, so what we have in the UK is we have the opportunity for civil society or interested parties to submit to the government consultations. So before they pass a policy, they're supposed to put out a consultation, a public consultation, and people are supposed to submit their reactions or their reasons for supporting or not supporting a specific policy. So we spend a lot of time responding to consultations in the hope that it will land on the right desk. We spend a lot of time in the media trying to create opportunities for our work to be picked up by people who are in the Treasury. We spend a lot of time lobbying. That's the strategy. I wish I could say that we have the answers. We don't. We're not in a great position. Not us. Women are not in a great position in the UK at the moment. It's been better. I can.
Two questions.
Mm-hmm.
First, are there things that have not worked out as you expected? Looking at the period of the budget group engagement and probably why. The second one is regarding the champions and allies in key positions. That is very helpful, but it's also people dependent. So if there are changes, for instance, one of the things that we are dealing with right now in the context of our work is we recently had an election. So there have been very many changes in government. There were people you're working with before, they have moved, or the others were simply not elected, but even those ones who are not in elected positions, they will probably be moved, like CC's Chief Executive Committee members. So how to deal, or how you have dealt with such changes, or how you have navigated that, having people move, and what to do so that you don't have a gap, then you're starting from square one. How do you, one of the questions we've been asking is how do you institutionalize this so that it's not really people dependent?
Things that have not worked. Plenty of things that haven't worked. Everyone, do you have any thoughts? I would say that it's very difficult to say what has worked and what hasn't, but I would say that the lack of political will and the environment that we're in means that we're not seeing the policy change that we want. Sometimes, for example, a politician will make a reference to increasing maternal employment, and we see it as an opportunity to talk about maternity pay or shared parental leave, and we get the media outreach, we get the response in the media, but it doesn't translate to any policy change. So this is a lot to do with your second question about it being people dependent and how to institutionalize things. You're not, just because there's a change of government, it doesn't mean that you're starting from scratch, because as politics works, people don't go away. Just because they're not in power anymore, that doesn't mean that they're gone. They still retain links and contacts, and so it's always good to keep in touch, but you will have to do, as political priorities change and your environment change, you will have to do a strategy. Every year we have a strategy that we have to start, not from scratch, but okay, what are the political priorities at the moment? What can we achieve in this year? What can we achieve in 3 years? You have to be realistic. It's not like you're throwing everything away, but you have to prioritize what you're going to focus on based on the context that you're operating in. To institutionalize things, it's really good to work, not just focus on the national government, but to work at county level or local government to try and get processes in place. So a good one was the public sector equality duty. That's a mechanism that you can use in the UK as a focus to say, well, you've passed this policy, but you have a duty to look at the equalities impact of it, and then you look at that from a gender lens. So it's about finding the avenues in which to insert your view. But again, you just have to keep pushing. I wish I had a better, more articulate answer for you. I'm sorry.
That answers it.
Thank you so much. I think I've also picked some of the strategy that we can adopt, but also just to chip in on what Faith has mentioned. We also struggled with that for the last 2 years, because at times we think the political leaders are the ones to be our allies. But now, coming to think of it, as in the just terminal employees, especially at the sub-county, today you'll wake up, the CC is fired, gone. So we thought, why not target the people who were there, like the strategists? And for us, we discovered that the directors are always there, because like they are the permanent employees, so they can only be moved to another department, but the position will always be there. So also targeting the institution as opposed to the person has also worked for us, because the institution will always be there. If it's an MOU you've signed with that department, it will always be there, regardless of the person being there or not.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And yeah, this is the importance that we have been focusing on civil servants. They might move around a lot depending on what's happening in government, but if you have a good relationship with them, they're an inside view into what's happening. They can tell you. So you need all of it. You need the institution and you need the person, I think. Yep. Andrew.
Thank you, Hannah, for that presentation. I think it's very insightful. So my question is, and I think you've mentioned it in terms of your engagement with political actors and policymakers, whereby one of the strategies is to lobby for certain policies and so on and so forth. So currently at Oxfam, we sort of have moved from lobbying, and you know, our position is that it affects the democratic process, you know, and also, you know, through lobbying, it then, you know, it then puts us in a very difficult situation where we, instead of being non-partisan, we seemingly can appear partisan, right? So maybe you can just explain further in terms of, you know, what kind of lobbying is it, legislative, you know, legislation and so on and so forth. Also, my second question is on the public participation during the budgeting process. Maybe you can share a bit more of your experience in the UK, especially considering the current practice in Kenya is that, first of all, the window for public participation usually is very small, and that does not, you know, it gives civil society a very small, you know, very small space and, you know, window to act, you know, to meaningfully interact with, you know, the information and, you know, just be able to give submissions. But also another question is, what platforms does the government, in your experience, or rather in your context, use to invite public participation? Because what we have experienced here is that they normally use the newspapers, and not everyone has access to the newspapers. And now that we are moving to the digital, you know, spaces, it's very hard for people, and sometimes it's by design, because they do, you know, especially when when some issues that are very contentious. So what are the platforms that the government use? Are there more current platforms that have been used to encourage, you know, public views and so on and so forth?
Okay.
So those are
two questions. So on lobbying, I probably used the word lobbying incorrectly, because I know our official position is that we don't lobby, we're independent, but we work with lobbying organisations on issues that we share, that are shared goals. So for example, there's a group called the Fawcett Society. We work very closely with them, but their goal is to increase the number of women in Parliament. And so we have a lot of shared goals in terms of policy and like employment for women and women in the labour market, but they will lobby. And so we will just work with them on policies that we agree with. So I hear that I think WBG will have taken a similar position in that lobbying makes you look like you are attached to a political party. Obviously, we have inside a preference to which parties that we would like in power, because we know which one will give us more opportunities for dialogue. Because at the moment we just want dialogue. Yeah, it is a position that we're quite stuck to be independent. We work with all political parties across the spectrum, and when we have things like panel discussions, we make sure that we have representation from across the political spectrum, so that we're not put into a category of always being tied to one political party. Is quite important. It's trying to overcome that danger of there being a change of government and you becoming obsolete. Yeah. On public participation, I am not an expert in this, but I know that in the UK there are not many avenues for public participation in the national budgeting process. The window is very small, and it is around the consultation that they put out before a public policy, which again is by design quite obscure and inaccessible. So this is why we focus a lot on our local data project, because at local level, so at the council level in the UK, there's a lot more opportunities for public forums, for meetings. All of this requires time, so you have you're making an assumption on who has the time and the capacity and the resource to attend meetings, because these things are not paid. But the local data project is one of our the ways that we do this. So we have capacity building workshops at the grassroots level to explain to people the avenues, and also a lot of demystification. So there's a lot of things around economic literacy and breaking things down to make them simple. One of our favorite things to say is like, the economy is all of us, so you have a say. It's not just something that happens to you, like you are part of it and you create it. So I hope that's helpful. Yep, Tommy.
I hope I heard you right. You said that funding from the government for civil society has been going down. So does it mean that in the UK, civil society gets funding from the government, and how does it work?
We don't get funding from the government, but there are a lot of the way that the UK works is like, when they have a policy on they announce a public policy on spending on domestic violence services, for example, that goes into a pot that service providers, who are also civil society organisations, they do both, can bid for that money, and that will be what informs their work. And that pot gets smaller based on austerity cuts. When you cut a public service, for example, you increase the pressure on these service providing organisations as well to pick up the slack of people who can no longer use the public services or the health services. The Women's Budget Group is funded by applying for funds from philanthropic foundations, and that's how it's all third sector funding. It's not from the government.
Okay.
Yeah.
My second takeaway, I think I really like the lesson number 8. Remember, this is a long-term project, and I think it stood out for me because most of us in this room also don't have like a fixed funding, or we need to like source for our own funding, and most times partners and donors want a 3-year project with a theory of change that has outcome and milestones. And something like GRB is not new per se in Kenya, but in terms of implementation, there is still a long way to go. So I think even as we have conversations in this space, there is need to also let people who fund GRB be aware that this can't be a 3-year project, and to have outcome or any long-lasting impact, it will be better to maybe also fund like 10 years or 5 years, but expecting, substantive work in like a 3-year project on GRB is not very thoughtful, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. We have the same issue with some of our funders when the funding is supposed to fund GRB specifically. Funders want to see a policy impact over an 18-month project or a 2-year project. the thing with funders, I'm not an expert. Our director is very much the expert on how to deal with funders. But a lot of our funding applications will say things like, you know, these things are long term. We're committed to measuring progress towards the goal rather than achieving this goal. These are the ways that we measure the progress, and these are the things that we're going to cover in our advocacy strategy. But yeah, no, I completely appreciate and agree that funding is a minefield. Anything else? Okay, thank you very much for listening to me. I really, really appreciate your attention and your questions. And yeah, I'm around if you have any more. Otherwise, I think I will hand over to Lucille. Thank you.
Good morning. How are you? You well? Awesome. So this session is like a continuation of what Hannah has done. I didn't even know what her presentation was all about, but just listening to her, it's like it's building up to what she's just presented. Basically, I'll be taking you through how can we be advocates in different spaces, from local level, national, regional, international. And I think we need to appreciate that each level feeds into the other one. So you have the local members feeding into the national, national feeding into the regional, and regional feeding into the international. As Hannah rightly put it, at the local level, they might not know the budgeting processes, but they are aware of the issues that are happening at the local level. So everyone is important up the chain. So in terms of GRB, accountability for GRB should start at the grassroots level, followed by national level, regional, up to the global community. And advocates are a key part of this process. So all of you are a key part into this process. All of you are feeding in, whether you are at the local level or national or regional or the global level. While not all international and regional agreements are binding, like for example, if you go to the UN, the UN Commission Status for Women, CSW, not all agreements will be binding. They are agreed upon through consensus with the intention that countries will adopt them in their national policies. So it is important for civil societies, including, I'm seeing there's so many young people in the room, to be engaged in discussions which lead to such agreements by putting pressure on governments to move beyond rhetoric and take concrete actions in high-level meetings. Yesterday, there was a lot of talk about we have legislations, we have been trained, so how do we move forward? So this is your time for you to moving forward, moving beyond the rhetoric and taking action as young people, as people working within your different spaces. Young people or advocates, GRB advocates, also need to convince their governments, either county or national, that there is need to be engaged as meaningful partners in implementation of agreements at the country level. So we are not going to keep talking about training. Now we are going to be taking action in our different spaces. So in terms of influence and decision making, it's not only done at the international spaces, but also just people acting locally, nationally, and regionally. So even within your space, within your CBO, you have a lot of influence. You can influence your county government to take up matters GRB. Sometimes you're all about, the national government, but then within that space that you're in at the community level, you're able to influence decision makers. So broadly speaking, influencers, see influencers on Twitter. Advocates like you and me work in a hierarchy. I think that is you from from the community, national, regional. And those who work at the local level, the civil society representatives or CBOs, should encourage decision makers, for example, CS Finance, to change their policies, positions, or practices. I think I just want you to appreciate, even if you're working at the CBO, that you have a lot of power and you are able to influence, for example, the CS Finance to be able to adopt matters GRB. However, those at the top can only be most effective when they have a broad base of support from their community. Yeah? So GRB can only be effective, for example, if you have a support base, for example, from constituencies or from the community. Those are the base of the hierarchy. The youth groups, the CBOs, the NGOs may not be directly involved in wider decision making, but the engagement in discussions about key issues can lend weight to GRB advocacy efforts. Do we agree? Do you see yourself in that food chain of GRB advocacy? Yeah? So one needs to feed into the other. There are discussions that we need to start from the community level as you feed it up to the regional level. Because it can't come from up ikuje chini. It comes from down as it keeps feeding into the other. It keeps feeding up into the hierarchy. Eric? So to make advocacy at all levels stronger, advocates at the local, national, regional, and international levels, there are accountability mechanisms to hold governments accountable for the commitments made and progress promised. Issues of M&E. You've made a commitment to something, then we need to measure if you've been able to implement what you committed yourself to. Like how many have heard about the Maputo Protocol? I know Wanjiko has. If you're a feminist or if you're within the feminist space, you've heard about Maputo Protocol. For those who don't know the Maputo Protocol, it's I don't want to say it's a protocol, it's a commitment for African women by African women. Like, which international commitment do you know? Which international commitment do we know? CEDAW. Do you know CEDAW? Have you heard of CEDAW? CEDAW. Have we all heard about CEDAW? Now, Maputo Protocol is the African version of CEDAW. It was made by us and for us. So if Kenya is a signatory to the protocol, so we are supposed to follow the protocol. So if there are things in the protocol that we are not following, then we are held accountable by the Maputo Protocol. So the same thing goes. If, for example, within the Maputo Protocol, there are issues of gender-responsive budgeting, and our government is not following the stipulated provisions in there, then we are accountable with regards to that. So GRB is all about politics at the end of the day. The political will for those who are in power. And negotiation is an essential school for effective engagement in politics. So one of the challenges that we shall face in many GRB initiatives is trying to convince government to start the initiative itself. I think Petronila said I've been trying, I saw Petronila, yes. You've been trying and it's been difficult in terms of getting GRB into your financing, yeah? Yeah. So it's all about politics and the matters of negotiations in terms of how do we start, or if it's already there, how do you sustain it, yeah? So in regards to that, there's a small exercise I want you to do. all of you, now I want all of you to come together. Next slide, Eric. That is the scenario. So a group of academics has done research into government budgets, which shows clearly some aspects of the budget are disadvantaging women and girls. The research has attracted a lot of media attention. The Minister of Finance, or the CS Finance, has therefore called a meeting of all stakeholders to discuss what should be done about this. The academics and possible other stakeholders want government to introduce GRB into the budgeting system. That's the scenario. The instructions. The role play will consist of preparation of the meeting and the meeting itself. So we shall appoint a CS Finance, and then we shall also have stakeholders, academics, and the other people. Who are we going to appoint as our CS Finance? Or can I choose? I should? Picky, picky, ponky. Who has not been speaking? Susan? Can you?
Sure.
You okay?
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So Susan is our CS Finance. Next slide. So we've appointed our CS Finance. The facilitator then divides other participants into these other roles. So we need academics, we need advisors, we need people from Ministry of Women, representatives of women's organizations, World Bank, donors, and parliamentarians. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many are we? 10, 18. 18 divided by 7? I've not counted Susan. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 18. 2 point something. We'll have extras. Okay. 1, 2. The two of you, academics. The two of you, advisors to Susan, to CS Finance. Cindy and Petronilla, representatives of Ministry of Gender. Daniel and Rina, and we're going to have leftovers. World Bank and IMF, Rina and Daniel. Asha and Rachel, donors. We're going to have leftovers. And then we have members of parliament. We can have Monica, Josiah, Sophia. I think even Francis can fall as M. No, we still have the two of you. So 1, 2, 3 members of parliament. And then Francis, you can join the academics. That is Andrew and Darby. You can join, my dear, you will join advisors to Ministry of Finance. Who are the advisors? Okay, you can join Faith Ann. Calvin, you will join IMF. Join Daniel's team. Wanjiko. Sawambunge. Donors. So Prudence will go to donors. Let's choose the tables. Who will come here? MPs there. IMF there. Academics. Women's Ministry, I think you can come. No, this is MPs. The Women's Ministry, some will have to share. Women's Ministry can come here. Donors and IMF, you can sit together. Yeah, donors, IMF can sit together. Advisors to finance, how many were you? Advisors, and I think advisors cannot sit together with academics. Advisors, you'll have to sit on your own. So probably you can come here. Academics, you can join from women, gender, okay. Representatives from women's ministry and the academics can sit together. Even we don't have women's organization. The CSOs, I don't think I need anyone, it's okay. So academics and the representatives from women's organization, from the Ministry of Women can sit together. Let me see, who have I left out? Okay, first change, then I see. So MPs there. And please play your role. Come on in Mbunge, Mbunge. At the sitting allowance. Someone can come and sit here. Anita? Madam CS? Where are her advisors? And? You are academics? And they are? Academics sit with the Ministry of Women. Where's the Ministry of Women? No, go there. Go there. So that we leave the advisors and the minister. Ministry of Women and academics here. Everyone has found who they're supposed to sit with? I should think so. Eric? No, next slide. So these are the instructions. Instruction number 1, participants go to their stakeholder groups, which you already have. You'll have I'll give you 6, 7 minutes to discuss number 1. Remember, you want to convince the CS to start doing GRB. So number 1, your position. Do you support the idea of the government's gender responsive budgeting or not within your groups? Number 2, if you do not support, there are arguments for this position. And then number 3, who can they convince to be your allies? Meshika. So after 10 minutes, inform participants that it is time for them to meet with other groups and convince them to be allies. And then I'll give you another 10 minutes for the process. Then we shall all come together. Then you'll come back and convince the CS Finance why you think GRB should be introduced. Okay? So you're not even doing much. It's for them to convince you why we need GRB. So you'll not talk much. So probably we shall need, I don't know if you'll appoint someone from within your groups to, I think you'll need one person who will now speak on your behalf to try and convince the CS Finance why we need GRB. So it is now 10:25. Yes, yes.
We want to convince Hawaii the ministry should adopt
GRB.
But I see a question that says our position, whether we support the idea of a government GRB or not. So how does that?
You could be against. So there are probably people who will support, and there are probably people who will not.
Who will be convincing and not?
Yes, there's a possibility of that. So depending on your group, you bring your position, your proposal. Does it make sense?
Unless we are acting out.
Of course we're acting out. Or can we decide for the groups who is going to oppose and who is going to, yeah. Okay. Because the MPs will come for oppose. Where are the MPs? The MPs can oppose. The academics and women's organization, definitely you are not opposing. You're supporting GRB. So we need to see the figures, the research. And the research, of course, is going to advise why we need GRB. So you are for GRB, MPs are against, oh, this is a Western concept, oh, we already look after matters women in our policies, so why do we need na 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 na? Opposers? We already have enough women in parliament, so why are you bringing this concept so along those lines? Who are we? You of course are going to support. So maybe you and the academics, after you finish discussing, you can try and see how your ideas will marry. For our CS, just sit still, sit pretty, and wait to be convinced or not. It's 10:27. At 10:37, I'll give you 5 minutes for you to, for example, for the academics and IMF to marry their ideas, and then at around 10:42 hapo, you'll come back and try and convince the CS. Sawa? Okay. People should be getting tea and coffee for you. They should be at your feet. And then your advisor should be telling you, oh yeah, Madam CS, I think we should take that, we should take that here. That's the work of the advisors.
The advisors. They don't have tenure, so like, because that's why I like.
Like no one will come up and say outright because it's a say it in a way that you know for instance if we talk about we have a lot of family problems and actually Kenya has demonstrated without saying,
Two more minutes. 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes. Rachel, hamjaanza. Lakini nyinyi watu wa donuts mko na pesa? Okay. IMF and academics, do you want to merge your... How much? It's 10:40. I don't want us to go for break late today. I want us to be on time. So time is really, really important now. 5 minutes, 2 minutes. Yeah. 3 minutes. Can you go back to sleep for the CS?
I'm telling you first.
You should find them.
Not for the meeting because
Eh?
I immediately asked that. After you playing.
Oh, kuna. Maton. I've never eaten chicken eggs in this hotel. Lakini hata different. I think it's an Indian. Lakini tulipikia usubu kwa jana. Fanya kitu hapo. It's off. Where's the sea? quick. Okay. Our CS is back. It's time to come and convince our CS whether or not we should introduce GRB. I think we will start with academics and women's organization. Then we shall go to donors. Then we shall finish with MPs, and then you'll make your decision. So 2.5 minutes per group. Be precise, state exactly what you want. Do not go beating around the bush. Don't go cutting corners. Be very precise. Yes, Andrew.
As academics, we can send delegations. We send a delegation to we can also send a delegation to
Will it take so much time?
That's too much. They are just
But you want to convince, or you're trying to buy in some. So you send. So there's a suggestion here. The academics want to try and buy in. They're already convinced, or you still want to convince them? You want to be convinced. So they will send their delegation. 1 minute, Andrew, 1 minute. One to the MPs, one to IMF. And then after we send the delegation, then you'll come back and we'll start the plenary. Is that okay? So are we going to listen to that conversation for the delegations? Oh, Chinyamaji? Okay. Delegation representatives? I think I want to listen to that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to listen.
So that we get to know what issues.
There are no envelopes going to the toilet. So, Mike, 1 minute.
Honorables, habari yenu. Wamama hoye. Tumefika hapa
English.
Kwa Mungu. And now that we have the opportunity, we must, support our women. We have been fighting for the 2/3 agenda, but now that we have women in parliament, we need to keep pushing this agenda. In addition, our debt is so high, and you know who approved the ceilings, okay? Now we need to redeem ourselves. We need everyone in the economy, and GRB is the best way to have everyone on board, because we must pay back China and we must pay back all our international subscriptions. And for that reason, please support our idea for GRB so that we collect more revenue from everyone and pay off all our debt.
Thank you, delegation. Darmi, who is being sent to IMF?
Good afternoon. So, first of all, I'd like to just start with the amount of debt that our country has accumulated, and that has not made the macroeconomic stability, sustainable for development. So our ask today is that if we have more people participating in the economy and contributing to the productivity, we could have, a better debt repayment and more sustainable in terms of our economy. What we're also looking at is inclusivity, where women, we are such a patriarchal society. I think in the modern world, women are, rightful placeholders for, in spaces where initially they were secluded. So if you want a very cohesive and, sustainable society, kindly support GRB in our budget, but mostly it's because of the debt. I think I just circle back to the debt. I think it's important that we are able to, increase our revenues, but also our human capacity index when we have more women participating in the economy. Santeni Sana. I did not come with any gifts, but
You know?
you guys have tea. You have tea.
Thank you, academics. Hearing those proposals, have you been convinced to join the other team, MPs? Are you still opposing? If not, Amjavuka Sakafu. Mwendo na mwendo aste aste. And IMF and donors. Okay, so now we shall hear the real thing. I think I'll start with the donors. I don't know if you're going to try and convince the CS to take up GRB or not, but I want to hear your arguments. So we are at 10:50. So 2 minutes per group, and then she will give us her decision. Oh, sorry. 2 minutes per group, then 2 minutes for the advisors to advise the CS, then the CS will give her her decision. Yeah. The CS is saying you come with envelopes. On a light note. Oh, you're not joking? Yeah, the CS is here. Come.
So good morning. Thank you for having us here. We've come a long way. But specifically to the advisors, to the members of parliament and the academics, we want to actually speak to you. We agree with the academics that we do need to help the country pay off their debts. And this can be done through gender transformative approaches. But we do want to give you our conditionalities for us to release our funding to you. And to start off, we'll start with the strategic objective number 3 that we are actually implementing in partnership with IMF and the World Bank. So this strategic objective is actually aligned with their objectives as well. And it's public finance management reforms towards successful institutionalization of GRB into Kenya's budgeting processes. So as you come to us and ask us for these resources to actually help you pay off your debts, kindly align with our strategic objective. And once you convince us enough that you will meet our objectives, then we will possibly release the funding to you. We have some few outcomes that we want you to also implement. We want to see this strategic objective meet the following outcomes. One of them is an increase in the gender-specific expenditure. That one specifically goes to the executive. I see our parliamentarians there and the advisors to the CS. We will also want transparency and inclusion in the budget making processes. This should work at both the national and subnational levels. We also want equal employment opportunities and improved conditions of work for women, especially. We also want this one, academics, evidence-based outcomes through research on collection and use of gender disaggregated data. So once you come to us with proposals that convince us that you will meet these outcomes and you also are aligned to our strategic objectives, then at that time, possibly we will release the funding to you. But just to show you and give you our commitment that we are very willing and able to support, so long as you convince us that you will utilize the money in the proper way. Thank you.
IMF, there's a rebuttal. Kindly send a representative to answer a question from one of the advisors.
We have spoken to a lot of things, but specifically for the national government and treasury, are you are implementing these strategies and you're giving money to CSOs and other organizations? are you giving money to Treasury to implement some of the strategies?
I thought we were speaking to the Treasury in the first place, and the academics come later, or just to support, to complement what you're doing, because we like to work with the government and government institutions. That is our priority, and this has worked in Morocco. It can also work in Kenya.
Over the years, we have worked with development partners. Resources are scarce in our country. We have competing priorities. And this new strategy that you want us to, this new approach to take in our budgeting, gender responsive budgeting, it's a new approach. Resources are scarce. We could try to see what we can do, but we cannot promise that it will be to the full extent that you're looking to have implemented in this nation. So that's why the resource question comes in. We have worked with development partners before. I don't know if that is something that IMF and World Bank are exploring. The direct coordination with the government and not just through CSOs.
I think the message is very simple. Whether you have little resources or you have a lot of resources, the message is, can you embrace gender responsive budgeting? With the little you have, when you're planning, when you're budgeting around it, can you invoke gender equality into it? It's not a question of how much you have. It's a question of adopting GRB in your process. The question of how much, how little will come later.
All right, we will consult in the ministry and we will see how to go about it. But my colleague has.
Also, before we move from that, we want to promise the government of Kenya that this is a long-term project and it's a journey that we are willing to walk with you. So long as that you show us that you're making those small steps towards achieving these objectives, we are definitely going to walk the journey with you.
Thank you very much, our development partners. As you are thinking through on what my colleague has mentioned, I'm the political advisor to Waziri. And one of the things that Waziri will really be interested to understand is why you're focusing on institutional strengthening and you have people who are dying of hunger. We have drought in the country. Why are you just focusing on institutions when our citizens, who are our first priority, are actually struggling at the moment? So that is a question that you also need to think through. Is it humanity, or are you thinking about how to spend your money?
So that you can just answer all of them at once. Another question is, you've given us your expected outcomes. What is the time span that you expect us to implement this? In addition to this, what are the repayment terms that you're giving us? And what are your collateral requirements?
Hey, the advisors are not joking. As IMF and World Bank are thinking through, we want to think through. As you're thinking through and you'll be giving us feedback, I want to hear from the academics. We don't have time, so if we can.
Wow. Thank you. For us academicians, it's our proposal that gender responsive budgeting is holistically included based on our Constitution of Kenya 2010, Article 27, Section Sub-Article 3, which states that women and men have equal rights in the spheres of economy. And so this needs to be realized as provided by our Constitution. Secondly, we note that we have high levels of poverty, and we need to see how do we bridge this gap in terms of addressing inequalities in our public sector. because we are losing, we see that women are highly enfranchised, standing at 36.2% in poverty levels. So we want to see how do we end poverty in all forms everywhere. So SDG number 5 fact sheet. Then we've not met our two-third gender rule. So this is important that for us to meet the two-third gender rule as provided by our COK 2010, that if we met this in terms of appointment, elective positions, and in all spheres of our economy, we are going to open the tax base so that we reduce on borrowing and these conditionalities from the World Bank and IMF, so that we have resources locally, that is improving our local resource base. Then the third thing that we looked at is we are losing 10% of our GDP just because of women are not exclusively and holistically participating in our development of our economy. So when we look at our GDP, it's like the non-inclusion of women in this process is, we are losing about 1 trillion shillings, which would have created employment opportunities, improved our economy, then made us expanded the tax base or widened the tax base, so that we address the deficit budgets that the country is actually found itself in, and we are spending on borrowings, and this is what we think we need to reduce and even come to its closure, and then reduce on the conditionalities that our country is being subjected to in terms of capital flight. Then lastly, if gender responsive budgeting is holistically applied across the sectors, then we will have reduced the high levels of poverty in our country, and our economy will be performing to its best. Thank you.
Thank you, academics. I was expecting figures like 20% of these shows.
I stated 36.2% of women are below the poverty.
Quote for me as an authority. Where did you get that figure from?
The gender fact sheet.
Thank you. We shall have questions for them. In the meantime, let's listen to the members of parliament.
We as members of parliament take these issues quite seriously, because we don't understand what is happening. We already have sufficient women funds going to women and women projects. Affirmative action, we have GAF, we have the women representatives, you can see there are 47, there are another 16 that we are going to nominate in the Senate. Really, there's Uwezo funds, there's GAF, as I've already said, and all these women empowerment funds. The boy child is really suffering. If you look at it, the man today in our society is poorer, very poor. And so trying to bring these things of gender is a discrimination against men. Further, this whole thing of gender, GRP, whatever they want to call it, this is a Western concept. It is being enforced on us. Do they know that we are a sovereign state? And we have our own laws. And we are run by our own laws. And so the proponents of these practices, who are they? Can they be identified in this society? Are they Kenyans? Do they know the real Kenyan issues? Because we are representatives of the public, as you know. And this is a non-issue, in our view. Our country is grappling with hunger. We have just come from COVID. And now in Ukraine there's a war. Pakistan is flooded. And you want us to sit around the table to discuss GRB. Isn't that a waste of public funds and time of members of parliament? Thirdly, do we really have the resources? If we are going to be sitting here, do we have the resources to adjudicate over such matters? To add more money into these projects they are calling GRB? Is there enough money in our kitty? These terms, they complicate the public finance system, and we are trying to make it understandable to Wanjiko as we go on the ground for public participation. When we start telling Wanjiko about GRB, really, is that fair? It is impossible for Wanjiko to understand these terms. However, after listening to the academicians, we feel that we are leaders, and I think there's an opportunity for further engagement with the stakeholders in a more in maybe a training or a retreat, so that we can understand these issues as the leaders. And then we need to go for benchmarking. Those donors who are trying to tell us how they have done this in their countries, we need to go and see how it is working, so that now we can know whether it is something we should consider. With those few remarks, we shall be summoning the Minister for Gender to be able to discuss further on these matters. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable members. I know I had asked you to think about the questions that the advisors had put to you, but let me allow them to consult, and then we shall have a response from the CS. So I'm giving you 1 minute to consult the CS, then you shall get her response on the same.
Based on your personal opinion or based on the presentation as we have done?
Based on the presentation and what your advisors will tell
So
you.
this doesn't reflect on our
No.
personality?
No. So you have 1 minute. Consult the CS, then the CS will tell us whether she will be able to implement GRB, and these are reasons or not, and then these are reasons. Let's assume that. Just say whatever you've discussed. Madam Waziri is ready to give us her perceptions. I request us to listen. Madam Waziri, karibu.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, we'd like to thank the academics, the members of parliament, and the donors, plus those we've left out, for bringing your proposals to us. However, we have a few notes out. For example, the academics, most of your proposal didn't have any solid data. So we would also like to bring that out. In the context of time, we'll keep it as short as possible. So based on your proposals, we would like to go with the members of parliament. We do accept your proposal. However, we as the Ministry of Finance will also be able to come with our own counter offer and maybe sit down together and discuss on a way we can move forward. We would also like to request all of you to please bring us a summary of 1 page, not 50 pages, in the context of time. Please keep your work as short as possible. Also in addition to that, I've also been advised by my advisory committee that our technical team will be able to sit with the academics and work together in order to find a way to move forward, because GRB is is a program we would also be very interested in, but the tabling of it didn't have us sold because of the very minimal data and presentation that was around it, which gave the members of parliament a very strong argument as compared to the other two teams. Oh yes, also we would also be very interested in going for benchmarking, just in order to get deeper into it. As for my people, I don't know if there's anything else you would like to add, or if you'd. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. How did you find the exercise? Do you think you were able to convince Madam Waziri? That's one thing. Clearly, with figures and authority. Be on your asks. So that is why she did not read your research. They are very busy people. What else did you learn? What did you get from that exercise? Yes, Josiah.
I think this depicts the current scenario, and I think everyone was acting out what they have seen, or whatever they perceive happened. Because do you know we received a brown envelope here? Because everyone would think that this is what happens to pass laws. On the other hand, you may find you have a few people, even among the parliamentarians, that may be that want to run with the course, but may lacking the sufficient. And so, to me, this presented the challenge, the challenge that we have, even in this room, or something that we are going to encounter out there, something we have encountered. And so, this calls for good. I think when Hannah was taking us through the different levels of people that we need to engage, I think that is intended to help us tackle the challenges that we are facing. For instance, how do you engage with the Treasury? How do you engage with the women rights organizations and other movements and donors, and just having synergies around pushing for gender responsive budgeting, and just moving slowly and realizing that there's resistance and all these things. So it's very real. That's why I appreciate people acting out
the real scenario are supposed to be saying, yes, we support GRB, it's nice, it's beautiful, because that's not what happens.
You will be opposed.
Yeah, and it's a valid expectation.
Another thing that just reminded me about the academics, your argument was based on if we support GRB, then we'll be able to pay our debts. Okay, of course, which is not really the case. But I liked your argument about it's about bringing the other half of the society that has been left behind, and they'll be able to contribute towards development. But more importantly is that GRB will be able to assist in terms of addressing the needs of men and women, boys and girls. That's the important argument. So it's not really about debt. I know you are acting, it's not about debt, but it's about addressing the needs of the different genders within the society. And then another important point is, I know I've talked about data, be very clear on what you want. Be very clear on your asks. Do not go threatening the CS Finance. Yeah? Do your homework very well. What matters to her? Maybe it's not matters GRB, maybe she's all about issues of children. So find a way of sneaking that into her heart, and then you put out your message. And then transfer ownership of the issue to the person so that they're able to own it. Let it not be something for academics, no. Transfer of ownership. Oh, you know, Madam Waziri, if you're able to accommodate issues of GRB, then it will be able to assist the men and women in their different issues. And maybe you could be appointed as the UN Goodwill Ambassador for Matters GRB, you know? So speak to their hearts and let them take ownership so that it's not academics or IMF who are running the show. Let them own it so that they're able to run with it. And then another thing, do not hesitate to flag off previous commitments. For example, you know, according to Maputo Protocol, and Kenya is a signatory to Maputo Protocol, and so we should be able to abide by these commitments. So those are things which are already on paper. Flag it off to her. Be concrete. Facts and figures matter. Oh, inajua, we read in gender fact sheet, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics states 20 whatever. Concrete evidence. Finally, make it simple and very doable. Don't make it look so hard. Mpaka they're wondering, sasa GRB tena ni nini, you know? Make it very simple and doable. So those are my takeaways. Thank you so much. It was so much fun listening to you. I hope you also learned something. But after this, we're going to deal with opposition. So it'll also be fun and just getting to hear how will we be able to dispel matters opposition. I want to release you for break. 20 minutes. Yeah. You go rejuvenate, then you'll come back at 11:35. 11:35. Thank you.